Hey, it's Andy Yanez, and you're listening to another episode of Pawd Slama Jama, now owned by Let's Reach Cougs. On this episode, we'll talk about the Houston Cougars football team, look ahead at the South Florida matchup, look specifically at the defensive line. We'll look ahead at the Houston Cougars football team not giving up, buying in to they were still being able to do what they expected to do, putting those expectations aside, getting past the rough up and down start. And then, of course, we'll end it by talking about the men's basketball team and the scrimmage they had this past weekend in San Antonio. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to Pawd Slama Jama.
Got high standards, high goals, and we know what it takes to get there.
I want to be unguardable, if I'm honest.
Coaches coach, players play.
And that's a great place to be in your life, where you can care less what other people think.
Joining me as always, Da'Yon Dunlap. How are you doing, sir?
Oh, sorry about that. I was muted. What's up, Andy? I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. No worries. We're coming off the heels of Houston's first back-to-back win this season. They come off the heels of a very strong, impressive win against Navy. They defeated the Midshipmen 38-20. Houston did just about, well, I was going to say just about everything right. They did have those mishaps with the 4 fumbles, 3 of which were recovered by Navy. That was the biggest kind of mark on that game. But I think overall, you can certainly agree that was the completeness game overall, the most complete game they played for the season, which it's indicative of how the season has gone, especially those first 6 games. They were really up and down. But I think, when we're going to kind of look at the Navy game, kind of put a final bow in it, but we've got to start defensively and the performance that they really did have, because we did mention those 3 turnovers the Navy was able to take, and defense did a good job of being able to hold the Midshipmen, and Navy only scored 13 points on the Houston defense itself. They had that scoop and score on one of the fumbles they forced on Clayton Tune. So that's what we'll pick up. And here's what head coach Dana Hogerson had to say during his weekly news conference this past month in terms of confidence and being able to kind of show that they are the team they thought they were coming into the season. I'm curious if, from a confidence standpoint, what you've seen from not just the defense, but your team overall since that game against Memphis, because you guys were able to follow it up with a really strong performance against Navy.
It clearly put us in a better spot. And we clearly capitalized on it. From a bye week perspective, we practiced hard. I don't know. I don't know if we would have been able to do what we did against Navy if it wasn't for the extra prep time. We were well prepared. I give our coaches a bunch of credit. Offensively, defensively, in the kicking game, our game plan was good. I don't know if we could have got that done in a week. I just don't. So. We got to face the same thing this week with South Florida coming in on a bye week when they're kind of shuffling some things up, much like we have had to. They got a bunch of injuries, but how many of those guys are they going to be able to get back, and what are they going to do offensively? How are they going to adjust? We don't know. We're going to have to figure that out, but we used it to our advantage. I'm sure South Florida used it to their advantage. On the topic of defense, we played great. Other than 3 critical errors, which, was the result in 2 touchdowns, a Hail Mary, a busted assignment on 1 long pass, and then, an explosive dive play. We played great on defense. And that's largely due to Donnie Mutin, Captain Donnie, who had career day. I'm disappointed he's not the American Conference Defensive Player of the Week. I thought he was deserving of that. Obviously could have been ours, but he's played against Navy 4 times and takes that very seriously. He's a very disciplined young man that understands how to defend that. Very proud of him. He was flying around, making play after play after play. Happy for him, proud of him. He's able to do some of that because of Dot in front of him. Our D-line played good. Disruptive, couldn't block him. Elias Bell played the best game he's played since he's been here. Jamar Caldwell, Jamichael Neal, Caesar, once again, same thing. So played good up front, which lets those backers run and hit. But Dot's just different. I mean, he does a thankless job. Takes on double teams. He actually split the double team a couple of times and made a play. It's not easy to do. He's able to do it. So that's why he was our player of the game. But just really proud of how we play defensively.
So there you heard it from Dana Holgerson. A lot of praise overall across the defense. But let's start with that defensive line because they did a really good job of being able to stop Navy and really shutting down any attack that they had. This was a Navy team that was coming into the game averaging 250 rushing yards per contest, and Houston held them to just barely over. They got 201 rushing yards, so far below their season average. And just overall, like you heard Holgerson mention, he really shouted out Chidozie Onuaku, who's Dot. But Da'Yon, what were your thoughts of the performance from the D-line?
I think the D-line set the tone. Like Coach Holgerson just talked about, they were able to not only control the line of scrimmage, but they're able to take on blocks. And like the block bully, his nickname Dot, said, like he cherishes taking on those double teams to keep the linebackers free, in which enabled Donovan Mutant to kind of run sideline to sideline and make some of those tackles and not miss tackles, sure tackles. And so I think that was the key for the front seven. Defensive line definitely set the tone, passing situations. They were able to pressure the quarterback. And so I think they set the tone, and it was a big week for them to set the tone, knowing you're going to face primarily a running attack.
Absolutely. And on the topic of Dot, I mean, he himself described his role. His job is to be the rock of the defense. And we're going to hear from Doug Belk momentarily, but he kind of touched down on how really everything starts up front for the defensive line, because if they can get a good push, something that we mentioned last week heading into this game, the battle in the trenches, if they can get a good push, it kind of ruins everything that Navy is trying to do. And it's something that we saw with the Cougars that they were successful in. And here's what defensive coordinator Doug Belk had to say about his D-line specifically.
Yeah, it all starts up front. Their scheme is very difficult to prepare for. I thought Brian earlier, our defensive line coach, did an awesome job getting those guys ready to go, along with some of the adjustments that we made from years past. And, we played Navy well last year in a lot of different areas, but we made some adjustments that helped us even more. We've had a little bit more length up front with Logan and Peyton and some of the guys, David and Nini, that have played and did a really good job in the past. And, a lot of guys who haven't played versus Navy on our roster that were able to go in there and impact the game. And it's very difficult seeing those schemes for the first time. So a lot of guys stepped up, did a really good job. And, the front kind of makes it all go, changing up the reads and some movement and some different things that we were able to do. And they were, a big part of why our linebackers and safeties, on the next level had success as well. When you look at the day that Donovan had, but it all kind of starts up front. Dot's main job was to keep the center off of our linebackers, and he did that the whole game, and he was able to change the game, be very physically dominant. And you look at Jermichael Neal and Jamari, Hakeem, other guys that played in there, and then at the defensive end spot, Elias Bell had a really good game for us, playing physical, making plays, impacting the game and the run and the pass. Cedric and Nelson, and then even Justin Beatles got in there and helped us and provided some depth. So very proud of that group. I thought they did a really good job, and a lot of it is your mindset because the blocks are coming different. They're hitting you low, they're hitting you high, it's coming off the ball fast. And I thought our mindset was great, to be physical and match their intensity and set the tempo, and I thought they did that.
Mindset was great, having to be upfront and physical. Da'Yon, before we kind of move on from the defensive line specifically, was there anything that stood out to you about what Doug Belk said there?
Yep, it was. And is it some of the players that had the lack of experience playing against a system like Navy can be difficult. And it kind of goes back into what Coach Holgerson said, having Donovan Mutant, who played against Navy 4 times, and that familiarity with a captain like that, I think that really helped prepare not only with the coaches and everything else he mentioned, but like he just said, it started up front, and also like he said, in which I said, the D-line was able to keep the linebackers free, because that's huge going against Navy, not allowing the linemen get to the second level. That's how they get some of those long explosive runs.
Yeah, and then specifically about Donovan Mutant. I mean, we heard it on the clip before from Dana Holgerson. He said that they played great defense, but it was largely due in part to Captain Donnie, is who Holgerson referred to Donovan Mutant. And Doug Belk, we didn't hear it in that clip there, but during his availability, he also talked about how, from that standpoint of, like you said, they had multiple players that didn't have experience playing Navy, and Donovan Mutin was one of those key players that, from a leadership perspective, told them what to expect and really helped them out. Not only that, but it just kind of goes along the lines of the type of person that Donovan Mutin is, because Belk said that Mutin enjoys when he sees a lot of his teammates see success, when he sees them make plays, and it gets him more excited. Doug Belk said that Mutin was the first person that got up and started clapping when Dot was named the defensive player of the game for Houston, which is something they do after every game, and that just shows, when you have one of the captains on the team like that be a leading motivator, is going to be really a big factor for Houston's success. And then going back to that mental point, it seems like now they're starting to create momentum going forward. Now, I know we're going to touch on specifically about USF in a second, but that's something that they haven't been able to have early on in the season just because of the ups and downs.
Yep, and they haven't. And building on momentum from that coming off the bye against Memphis and now continuing that against Navy. And then you see what's going on around the conference. UCF took a loss, and so you still know that their goal at the beginning of the year is still attainable. You still can win the conference and then let the chips fall where they may. And so take it a game at a time. I think they are playing more consistently and also more complementary football. The defense is complementing the offense, and the offense is complementing the defense by sustaining drives and things like that, and which we'll talk more about the offense here in a second. So I think they're doing a good job of stacking up the consistency and stacking up the days, good days is what I should say.
Yeah, and kind of looking ahead at South Florida, who's going to be Houston's opponent this coming Saturday. Once again, that's going to be an 11 a.m. kickoff. The homecoming game for the Houston Cougars at TDCU Stadium. But entering this game, South Florida, when you look at the record, it doesn't stand out. They're 0-3 in conference. They're 1-6 overall. But head coach Dana Holgorsen and Doug Belk, both of them kind of were along the line, said throw that schedule or that record out the window, because they have played opponents much tougher than their schedule would indicate, or than their record would indicate, and they've been kind of snaked a little bit when it comes to their circumstances. In particular, Doug Belk mentioned how they've been battling through injuries, especially now that they're going to be without their starting quarterback. They lost him a couple weeks ago. They had to battle Hurricane Ian in the Tampa area that affected them just a couple of weeks ago. And then now they've had to deal with a tough schedule because they played. You talked about, I know that's something that Holgorsen has mentioned throughout the first 6 weeks, the tough schedule that Houston had, but South Florida's had to play BYU. They've had to play Florida, Louisville, East Carolina, Cincinnati, and Tulane. So they've had a gauntlet when it comes to their schedule. And here's what Doug Belk had to say specifically more about the matchup with the Bulls.
Yeah, when you look at their record, it is very misleading. These guys are coached very well as far as, schematically. They've had a lot of guys in and out of the lineup and battled injuries and had to overcome a lot of things with the Hurricane and had a very difficult schedule up to this point. But the talent is there. It's what you think of when you think of, Florida speed and the talent that they have on the perimeter. They have 2 elite receivers and a couple guys who are right there behind them as far as talented. So they have 4 or 5 guys on the perimeter that really dynamic and can change the game at any minute, and they have some home run hitters. And then, we talked a lot about their starting running back, 21, 2 kickoff returns for touchdowns against us last year, as well as a rushing touchdown. He's one of the most dynamic guys at his position in the country, and one of the top players in our conference as far as all-purpose yards on a weekly basis. So a lot of electric guys there, and with Bohannon, it could have been the most explosive, capable offense that we played. Morris has played, the guy that we expect to start, 6'5", 230, dual threat guy, strong arm, does a lot of things well. So it'll be interested to see how they use him. But overall, 4 returning starters on the offensive line. They had 5 returners. The left tackle has not played in a couple games, so don't know what his status is. So they have experience, they have explosive capabilities, and guys who can change the game with their athleticism. And schematically, those guys do a really good job as well. A lot of shifts, a lot of motions, a lot of different formations to get their playmakers in position to make plays. So The challenge is going to be great for us and a new week, but the same goal. So we have to do a really good job in preparation and having an urgency, early game, get out there, get going, and do whatever we need to do to come away with a victory.
So there you heard Doug Belk talk about that much matchup specifically, and just a lot of the challenges that USF poses and will pose for Houston this upcoming Saturday. And you heard Belk kind of touch on it a little bit when it comes to special teams and the running back that gave Houston a lot of problems. He referred to him as number 21. He was talking about Brian. I'm gonna butcher his last name. Brian Batty, I believe is what his last name is. But he mentioned it right there. He had 2 kickoff return touchdowns a season ago. He had a rushing touchdown against Houston. That's something that Dana Horison himself mentioned during his availability, that there's going to be an emphasis on special teams, in particular kickoff coverage. It was something that he was not happy with this past game against Navy, and it's going to be something that's going to be a point of emphasis, is what Horison said heading into this matchup with USF.
Yeah, and it should be. And one thing that stuck out to me that Doug talked about was that Florida speed. One thing you know about Florida and Texas are probably, in my opinion, the top 2 beds as far as talents for football. California is making some noise of recent, also Georgia. But one thing, you think Florida, you think speed. And you just mentioned their running back, number 21. He has electric speed, and along with some of the other skill positions. So you know they're going to have some explosion or athletes with explosiveness that can make plays. And so, like they both talked about, you can allow a record to kind of determine how you come into a game, in which I don't expect Houston to do that. I expect for them to come in with a sense of urgency, like they've been these last couple of weeks, to come in and kind of take care of business. And I think they came into the season with hype. Now, Jay's kind of talked about it in his availability this week, was kind of not dumbing down the expectation, but realizing where they are right now and kind of fighting to prove that they're the team that they know they can be. And I think that continues this week against South Florida.
Absolutely, and something that we're going to touch on in our next segment. You just referenced Jace Rogers, but the thing that we're going to hear in a bit, but really the emphasis for Houston and the defense was that communication, being able to have everyone be on the same page and understand that, like you mentioned, their goals are still ahead of them, which was to come in here and win the American Athletic Conference. And that's something that they're at a point really where they can't take any opponent lightly, because especially where they are right now, they're kind of in every game's a must-win game. They can't afford to lose one game, especially now with, they've already lost to Tulane. They're not going to see Cincinnati this season, at least in the regular season. So if they want to get to that American Athletic Conference championship game, it's going to be something that they're going to have to clean up and really go win the rest of their schedule in the American Athletic Conference. Is going to be much easier said than done. But real quickly, an overview of the Houston and South Florida all-time series. The Cougars actually lead it 6-2. This game, like I mentioned, is going to be at TD Stadium, where Houston leads that series 3-1. A bit of an interesting note on it. Houston's currently on a 6-game winning streak when it comes to the overall matchup against the Bulls. So that means that USF won the first 2, and then Houston has won the next 6 straight. Now, we talked about it, how it was referenced in terms of what happened last year, and it was a USF team that came in here and they gave Houston a pretty good fight, and they were able to give Houston problems. I'm sorry, they didn't play in Houston. They played at Tampa, but they were very competitive, and they were able to give Houston problems, especially when it comes to the special teams that they haven't forgotten. And it's going to be something that Doug Buck said, they can't take this opponent lightly.
Definitely can't take them lightly. And one thing, not only do you have to win out in this age of college football where it is right now, you got to have style points. I mean, you don't know how this season is going to shake out from other teams, and it might come into account, like, how did you look against teams that you beat? Did you dominate them? Did you score X amount of points? How much did you beat them by? And so I know the first step is to win the game and take care of business, but you also have to keep in mind how they do it. They looked really good against Navy this week, and I think against a team with the record that they have, there are going to be expectations to look really good against this South Florida team. And so I think they can do it. Let's see if they do.
Absolutely, and a couple of news first overall. When it comes to the Bulls, one thing that you heard Doug Buck talk about right there, they have four returners along the offensive line. They have experience. They have players much more. They are versatile in terms of the skill positions. You heard Doug Buck talk about it there. They have four or five different receivers that all bring different skill sets to the table, and they can really cause a lot of problems at any given time. One interesting key thing to note from a Houston perspective is going to be something to monitor as we get closer to Saturday. But Dana Holgorsen said that running back Tajon Henry, who underwent surgery, he'd been dealing with an ankle injury heading into the surgery that he had at the beginning of the month. Holgorsen on Monday said that they expect Tajon to be back at some point this season. He said it could potentially be this week against USF, so that'll be something to keep an eye on. It certainly will be big for Houston in the backfield if they can get Tajon Henry back. Even though Stacey Sneed is coming off his best performance of the season, he was able to put up 100 rushing yards. But it's kind of seemed like the running backs group it's been kind of running back by committee. Where one game we've had Brandon Campbell come in and he had a big game for Houston. Another, it was Tajon Henry, and this past week against Navy, it was Stacey Sneed. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on right there. Da'Yon, before we kind of segue into our next segment, what is there going to be one key or something, one area in particular you're going to be looking at from a Houston perspective when they take on USF?
I think getting out to a good start. One thing they did against Navy finally was getting out to a good start. And I think that bodes well for not only the offense, but the team overall, the defense as well, and just the morale, the energy on the sideline, the coaching staff. I think everybody kind of settles in well, in my opinion, when they get off to a good start, whether it's offense or defense. So I think that's the key for me is whether you're on defense or offense first, get off to a good start and then kind of settle into a rhythm and let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah, USF going to be without their starting quarterback, who you heard Doug Buck
Transfer from
reference
Baylor.
it in the video. Yeah, he underwent right shoulder surgery that's going to keep him out for the remainder of the season. The quarterback that they're expecting to take his place, Travis Marsh, who they saw last season, and I mean he had a pretty decent game this past their last game against Tulane, where he threw for 150 yards. He threw 2 touchdowns, no picks, but it was against a Tulane team that USF couldn't keep up with. So he's going to be someone to keep an eye on. Importantly, with Doug Buck said, he's a dual threat quarterback that has an arm, so that's going to pose a challenge, and he can pose a challenge at any given moment. But coming right up, don't go anywhere. Our Pawd Slama Jama podcast continues, and we'll focus more specifically about the Houston Cougar mindset, because Dana Holgorsen was asked about where he felt his team was, just in terms of if he ever felt like they had, for the lack of a better phrase, gotten demoralized with the way the first 6 games of the season have gone. Dana Holgorsen said he never felt that from his team, and we'll hear more from a player's perspective about what that first 6 up and down inconsistent 6-game start was for the players. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Pawd Slama Jama. Hey, oh my God, this might be our most watched show, most viewed show.
Comments been going crazy.
Yeah, comment.
Oh, I can imagine.
Basketball is great, man.
They're on the come up for sure.
Repeat that throughout the game, not
We have got a lot of work to do.
That's your reminder to check out Let's Rage Cougs on the Houston Round Ball Review, streaming minutes after the conclusion of every Houston football game, and starting November 7th, every men's basketball game, to check out our instant reaction to everything that happened and went on during the game. And particularly for home games specifically, you'll get to hear from what head coach Dana Holgorsen had to say in reaction to the previous game. But jumping right into it, in particular, obviously the story of this season for the Houston Cougars football team has been the inconsistency that they've seen in the first 6 games. And it started off with one hell of a game against UTSA. They came back, they won it in triple overtime. Then they played Texas Tech. They had a big disappointment being able to not close the deal against the Red Raiders, going back to that 4th and 20 situation. Then they ran into a red-hot Kansas team, and then we know the story. Rice came down to the final possession. Tulane they couldn't beat without their starting quarterback and without their second-string quarterback. And then really it came down to that Memphis game where heading into the bye week, they were sitting at 2-3. we mentioned it, that game very well could have defined what this season was for Houston. And, for the first 3 quarters, it seemed like the season might be on this last leg because they were down 19 at one point against the Tigers in that fourth quarter. And then I don't know where they rallied back. Kudos to the players, to the coaching staff that they kind of stuck together and were able to make that rally, not only to defeat Memphis, but really honestly save their season. And we're going to talk more specifically about what that was like from the players' perspective. Here's what Chase Rogers had to say about that win against Memphis specifically.
Well, I would say like the mood of the team never really went anywhere. We always knew it was pretty good. It was just the fact that we was always making little critical errors down the stretch in those games. So it's just kind of like just trying to get everything together, trying to make everything complete. So with that, we was just practicing every day, just better communication, just making sure talking through everything like before we go out on the field, because before the last 2 games, our only 3 losses became from 6 points. It was a 6-point difference. So we always knew it was pretty good. We just had to fix the little beginning of the season things that go on. Like I feel like the communication came from like everybody, because we were so worried about the outside noise and what everybody expected of us. So we was thinking about conference championship and everything instead of handling the task at hand. So it's like everybody, like once we figured out like, okay, boom, it ain't going how we want it to go. So everybody just started voicing like Donnie, he's an amazing leader. Donnie, G. Owens, they're amazing leaders, and I wouldn't ask for nobody else to lead us. But we just came to a point where everybody was just voicing their opinion, like we need this to work and we got to make this work, especially in the DB room, because most of the mistakes that came down the stretch was in our room. So we made sure everybody was on the same page, extra meetings, staying after practice, just making sure everybody was on the same page. And I feel like that's how we've been getting it on the road the past 2 games. Like I feel like we needed that win bad. It was a must win for us. Like if we didn't get that win, I don't know how the locker room would be, but everybody in high spirits. We came together as a defense. We had defensive meetings and stuff like that to be like, okay, this is what we're gonna do. Our goal's still on the table. Everything we want to accomplish still can be accomplished, because it's like, so why not talk about it and have extra meetings and make sure everybody else on the same page to get where we need to go. So just a little more meeting and talking to each other and just even hanging out when it ain't football, just to get closer to your brother and stuff like that. So we did a lot of that, and I feel like it was a turning point for us. We needed that win.
It was a turning point for the team. They needed that win. You heard it there from Chase Rogers, Da'Yon. Before we get into any of the other clips from Dana Horse in particular and what he's seen from the team after that win against Memphis, I think that's a testament to the veteran leadership, to the senior leadership on this team. And in particular right there, you heard Chase Rogers talk about it, the defensive back room specifically kind of taking responsibility for how those close losses came.
Yeah, taking a responsibility and accountability for how they came and their mistakes. So it was good to hear him see that and hold the cornerback, the defensive back room accountable, and then hearing the solutions to their problems, in which he talked about communication and being able to communicate and re-emphasize in communication, whether if you already said it 1 or 2 times, say it 3 or 4 times, just to ensure that your teammate got whatever the call or whatever the situation is. And so that was good to hear them say that. And like I alluded to earlier about kind of being where their feet are and focusing on the moment. And I think the way the season started early, it kind of really, really made them hone in on where they are right now and focus on what they need to do game by game. And so it was a lot to unpack there, but I really love all of that I heard from Chase Rogers for sure right there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we heard Rogers there. All the outside noise, they were focusing on all the expectations. And then, it might have been a little bit of a shell shock where, they had all that buzz heading into the season. I mean, really, they got punched in the mouth by Texas Tech, and then Kansas followed it up by coming and delivering another right hook to the way the season had come. And then the Rice game, especially when you look at it, how it ended, Houston ended up winning, but Holgerson was frustrated. He was clearly frustrated with the way that final possession had gone in terms of the Houston defense, and Rice really being real close to scoring a touchdown on that final drive. And I mean, again, kudos to the players specifically being able to, like you heard Rogers there, communicate with each other, kind of figure out, well, assess how the season had gone, figure out that communication is key in terms of a lot of the problems they've had. And I think first and foremost, what you've really seen, at least when you look at it from a stat sheet perspective, the most important thing for them is how they've been able to cut down on a lot of those silly mistakes, especially when it comes to penalties in regards to, and this is not just in terms of the defense, but this is overall across the board on the team. The offensive line has cut down a lot of pre-snap penalties. I mean, they're coming off their best game of the season. When it comes to that, they only had 4 penalties accepted against them, which is by far the lowest they've had all season long.
And that kind of goes into situational football. A lot of times in those situations, it'll be a 3rd and short. You get a false start, pre-snap penalty, push you back to a 3rd and long, and that'll kind of stifle some of the drives, and it'll hurt some of the play calling that they could have made if they would have had a 3rd and reasonable.
Yeah.
Or there's some of the penalties that the defense would make that keep drives alive, or allowing plays that's 3rd and really long and you keep driving alive. So I think all around the bye week came at a perfect time when they got the win. So I think the season is kind of shaping up in the favor of Houston and allowing them to kind of control their own destiny, almost in a sense. If they can win out, you still need a couple things to happen for them to make their championship game. But if they take care of business, I mean, they can be potentially right where they want to be. And I mean, I think the team definitely hasn't lost. The Coach Holgerson and the staff hasn't lost the locker room for sure. That was kind of, we speculated because we were unsure how the season started. We were unsure.
That was a lot of noise, even from national perspective.
No, for sure, national perspective and just us. And so, and it's good to see that. I mean, because we don't expect him to go anywhere anytime soon. The recruiting is still doing well, and so the product on the field, I think, has to reflect that as well. And over these last few weeks, they have done that. They have made adjustments. It looks like Coach Holgerson is calling plays. Do we get any confirmation on that? Did anyone ask him about that?
We did not.
Okay, well, it seemed like he did. And if he did, I will give him his credit because that was something that he specializes in, part of why he got the job. And so if he did do that, I don't know if he would admit it or what. We can't get confirmation, but let's just say if he did look like he did, I have to give him his props for that. And the defense just continuing to get better and not hurt themselves on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some change, whether it be the way they're preparing, at least the way that the message is being relayed, or the way the players are going out there and executed. Now, it's a perfect segue, Da'Yon, because you just mentioned there was a lot of speculation in terms of where maybe the mindset of the team was, and kudos to the coaching staff and the players, because I think it showed right there when they were down 19 in the fourth quarter against Memphis. That could have been it. They could have let go of the rope, and that fire would have just grown much. It would have been uncontrollable at that point. Here's what Dana Holgerson had to say about really the mindset of that program at that time.
Oh yeah, we've been in some bad spots because of some close losses, but I never felt like we lost the team or the the pulse wasn't there, the work ethic wasn't there, the practices weren't there. I haven't felt that. I just think we got really good character on this team and kept fighting, and a lot of fight, right? So all those early season games, wins, morale was high. Losses, we were disappointed, but not down to the point to where we could practice and prepare the right way to go out and compete, which we've done every game. A couple of disappointing losses, but it wasn't because we weren't competing. Just ball didn't bounce our way or whatever you want to say. It doesn't matter. Everybody's got their own opinion. I've been proud of our team with the fight that we've shown. It allowed us to come back against Memphis. and win. And Memphis is a good football team, but they're going through it right now too with close losses and stuff. But that's the conference and that's college football. You deal with it, and our team has dealt with it. And happy playing right home after Memphis. I couldn't quit giggling. It was a good feeling to be able to do that, and we used it to our advantage. And we had confidence going to Navy and playing well, and we did. We had confidence. We went up there and we played well. Been having to answer questions about starting fast forever. We did that. And so that's improvement. Still haven't played a complete game, but I'm just happy with what the progress is, and I think our morale's good. We're in a good spot, and we're excited about playing again here this Saturday.
I think the key for me in that soundbite, confidence, which is something that, especially when Houston was sitting, especially after that Tulane loss, that's probably where the team's confidence might have been at its lowest all season long. And again, kudos to the turnaround that they had been able to do. And going back, it's a testament to the leadership in that locker room, man.
For sure, and that's something we talked about was them competing. And I agree with Dana wholeheartedly. I never saw anyone in any of the games, even if they lost, that they weren't competing. They will have competed. And I kind of alluded to that in one of our previous podcasts or legendary schools. I can't remember exactly that. When players step on the field, they have their own pride within themselves and they're going to compete. Because at the end of the day, I'm sure most of them want to play professionally. And what you put on film represents you, not just the program. And so I agree with Dana 100%. The competitive nature has never lost. The team has always fought. And so when the ball finally falls your way against Memphis, then you get the bye week, you get the rest, you get the reset, then you continue what you built against Memphis, against Navy. And now you start to have some momentum. And now you kind of have reassurance that you can do what you thought you can do to start the season. And the way things are lining up, I think the confidence has to be maybe high, or you have to be confident within yourself and within your team that they can win these games.
Yeah, and one of the players that has been pivotal for the last few games in that turnaround has been Sam Brown, who Dana Horson mentioned. He really got to start see him making plays during that Tulane game, and then he followed it up with 10 catches against Memphis, and then he had another strong performance this past week against Navy. And again, that's something that, going back to playmakers, he's been one of the players that has been able to come up and be an impact for Houston. And that's a big reason why the offense has been able to be much more of, like Horace said in the clip, effective, whether it be with the fast start that they just had against Navy. And here's what Sam Brown had to say just in terms of the leadership standpoint, which, again, I think that's a big testament to being able to have that turnaround. Here's what he had to say about that, about both quarterback Clayton Tune and obviously the lead receiver in Tank Dell.
If I can piggyback off, if I can follow up with that, if you don't mind, Andrew. You also mentioned how gaining Clayton's trust in practice. How do you feel y'all chemistry has been over these last few weeks?
It's been great. One thing Toon has been good of, like, early in the season and still to this day, like, he always knew I was that guy. It was just a matter of time when it was gonna be displayed. So that's another reason. Like, he always put it on my ear, like, I ain't forget about you. Like, and some days when it was a good practice and I didn't have as many balls as everybody else, he was like, "Yeah, I see you working harder. The ball gonna come your way." So he just never made me feel like I was overlooked, stuff like that.
Thanks, Da'Yon. We'll send it to James Mueller.
Yeah, Sam, I was just wondering what it's been like for you to play aside a guy like Tank, who's, so explosive, and, just how he's able to free things up for the whole receiver group.
Me personally, I can't, it's a blessing playing with him. Just seeing his work ethic in practice, what I'm saying, his demeanor in game, it's just you feel me, it boosts me up to another level. So it's just it's a blessing playing with Toon and Tank for real. Like, just them having that dynamic duo, and Toon being as accurate and as much as a competitor he is, what I'm saying, that's all I can ask for as a quarterback. And that's the same thing with Tank. Like, that was the catch he made in Memphis. Like, still to my day, him hurt. Like, he not even coming out of the game. Like, without that catch, we don't know what that game would have ended like.
Again, that was receiver Sam Brown. A couple of things, and the key there is what he talked about, Clayton Tune. And again, that goes back to a leadership perspective, where there would be practices. He might have not been a focal point during a practice. He might not have gotten the ball as many times. And Clayton Tune made sure to go to him and kind of explain to him, hey, I see the work you're putting in. Keep your head up. The ball's going to come your way eventually.
Yep. And that's what stood out to me too. And that's kind of reassuring your receivers. Like, I see you working, although you didn't get as many targets. Just keep doing what you're doing. I'm gonna look your way. And like Sam just said, that kind of gave him the reassurance and the confidence to put his head down, to keep working, that his number is going to be called. And when the ball came away, he's been a playmaker. He said he's never lacked confidence. He knew that he was that guy. Clayton knew that he was that guy. It's just about opportunities. And I mean, I gotta say, I really like the young receiving core that we have throughout the season. They've all produced in moments, whether it's from Man Jack in the first couple games. We saw Golden make some plays. Now Sam Brown is coming on. And so kind of foreseeing the young talent that we have, I think it's really good. But another thing that stood out to me was the work ethic that he mentioned from Tank. When your best receiver works hard in practice, and which that's what Sam Brown just said, and then not only that, you see that he's willing to put his body on the line and stay on the game when you know he's hurt. That's leading by example right there. Things like that will go a long way, because you see, if my best player is willing to do that, knowing he has a future in the NFL, then I gotta put myself on the line and do whatever I can to help this team. And the receivers have been making plays. I've been channeling for them to get more opportunities, and Clayton to give them more opportunities. And over the last few weeks, he's been doing that, and they've been rewarding him and the team of that by making more plays.
Yeah, Keyshawn Carter, the other receiver that's that's come up huge for Houston, especially the past two games. In particular, I mean, that Memphis game, he scored 2 of the 3 touchdowns that Houston had in that fourth quarter. So he's been another pivotal player when it comes to that turnaround. That's going to do it for this segment, but don't go anywhere, because coming right up, we'll talk about the Houston men's basketball team, that they are now 12 days away until they tip off the regular season against Northern Colorado, November 7th at Fertitta Center. And we'll be talking specifically about that not-so-secret scrimmage and kind of the reactions from Kelvin Sampson. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to Pawd Slama Jama. But before we do that, I'm going to take the time to point out we are so close to 400 subscribers. And I just want to, first of all, thank you for those of you guys that have subscribed. If you're just checking us out for the first time, we hope that you enjoyed what you've seen through the course of the first 2 segments. We would like to remind you that we are on the road to 1,000 subs. So if you haven't done so already, please be sure to do it down below. It takes like 1 second to do it, so it really helps us out. Once we get to 1,000, it's going to be really crucial for us, because that's going to be the point whenever we can start monetizing off the channel. And like my co-host Da'Yon Dunlap says, this is your one-stop shop for all Houston Cougars football, men's basketball, and women's basketball, and it's stuff that you're not likely going to find anywhere else. But that's for the segue part of it. Da'Yon, we are back for our final segment, in particular when it comes to the men's basketball team. Now, obviously, when it comes to where this program is, we've talked about it for the past month. It's all expectations where they are. Last week we talked about the AP poll, where they were ranked 3rd in the entire country. Well, this week the coaches poll came out, and surprise, surprise, they're also 3rd in that poll. A lot of national expectations, but the thing that garnered a lot of buzz in regards to this program this past weekend was the not so secret scrimmage that they held against Texas in San Antonio. Now, we won't talk too much about specifics in this podcast. If you'd like to hear more specifics, be sure to click out in the archives on the video that we had this past Saturday. But I guess just to set the stage, they did essentially, there was a main part where they had 2 20-minute periods that essentially worked like a college basketball game that you'll see. And it was really a good opportunity for both programs in Houston, Texas, to be able to just essentially have a dress rehearsal, for the lack of a better phrase, before both of those teams start off their regular seasons, since both programs have a lot of expectations now. Here's what Kelvin Sampson had to say specifically in regards to what he saw during that scrimmage, specifically focusing on the freshmen.
It's that experience. Well, the only way they're going to get that experience is to experience it by playing. You know, and every time out there, they'll be self-taught in some ways. You know, one of the things I noticed, both teams Saturday got tired of it because there's adrenaline and emotion involved for the first time. There's no adrenaline and emotion involved at the start of practice here. You know, there was some, you know, I'm sure question marks in the players' minds because now, instead of Jamal going against Malik for the 20th straight practice, he's going against that guy. Or that guy for the 20th straight practice has been going against this guy. Now he's going against Marcus Hasser. So all of a sudden you get those emotions involved in that and the adrenaline involved in that. So now fatigue will come quicker. But I think between me and the other coach, we must have used 75 timeouts the other day, which was second to how many fouls we had.
Kelvin, is the defense sort?
So there you heard Kelvin Sampson talk a little bit about different things, but in particular, right there that stood out, he mentioned the fouls, which I guess that we can't necessarily nitpick on anything like that, but I think the biggest thing that Kelvin said during his availability on I believe, Tuesday that he spoke to reporters was just in regards, there were more things that he saw. Kind of along the lines, he said he saw more good things during Saturday's scrimmage than stuff that concerns them. And in particular, that's vital for the freshmen because it's kind of their first real taste of what it's like to play against another college level team, you know, without as high of stakes because it is not counting for a record.
Right. And so the main thing he was taking out of that was the experience. And I'm sure he went into that scrimmage wanting to work on certain things in which they were able to do that. And I think the scrimmage was really a measuring stick from both programs. Up until this point, they have X number of practice, and so you install certain things and you want to come out and put that to use against a different opponent. And so they were able to do that. But more importantly, the freshmen get that experience before they actually take the floor when it really counts. And so I think it's much needed. And I think it was a good experience from what I've heard. The team had a good showing, which we don't want. Andy has a video on our YouTube channel. You know, he talks more in detail about the scrimmage itself. And so I think overall it was good. Not only that, I think really more good for them to kind of play against someone else because it could be tiring playing against each other over and over and over. And then when you finally go up against someone that kind of settles in with Coach Sampson and the coaching staff has been installing for so long.
Yeah, most importantly, it allows them to see, you know, what areas they still need to work on and what other areas might be strengths for the team. Like you said, when they're going up against an opponent that they don't see as often as they have in that clip, Sampson said, you know, they counting the scrimmage, they had already practiced 20 times throughout the month. So you can imagine if the 20th one was the scrimmage, they faced off against each other 19 different times. So you get to a point where it gets a little bit of repetitive and you know what your teammates trying to do, you know what the defense you guys are trying to run, but kind of focusing on that freshman perspective. Here's what freshman guard Terrence Arsenault had to say about that scrimmage and in particular how the practices for Houston have prepared them going into your first real taste of what it's like to play against another team at this level. You know, what was that like for you, and what was the, I guess, main teaching point that you took away from that scrimmage?
Man, that was a great experience. You know, that was really, you know, I really enjoyed myself that time. I feel like I had a great showing. You know, I did everything that coach asked me to do, you know, on the defensive end and different things like that. You know, so you know, I'm just continuing learning. Like that was like you said, that was my first time playing and different things like that. But it was definitely fun. I enjoyed myself, you know, watching them guys out there. Then when I got out there and played, I felt very comfortable out there, like I fit in. But you know, coach prepared me for that. You know, he's been getting on me since like the first day of practice, so he prepared me, and I felt like I was very, very comfortable with it. So,
was there something? Oh, my bad, Joseph. Was there something just that a difference that might have stuck out to you that's different from playing against a college level team and a high school level team?
Man, I ain't gonna lie, man. Practice was way harder than the game to me. You know, our practice is just, it prepares you. Like he said,
he told me at the beginning of this, like, the game's not going to be like practice. The practice is going to be way harder, and it definitely was. You know, I got out there in the game, and everything just slowed down for me. You know, I understood everything. So hopefully I could just continue growing off that play that I had during the scrimmage, you know, and just continue getting better. But it definitely, you know, practice definitely prepared me for them.
Once again, that was Houston freshman guard turns Arsenal. So a couple things there, and I think in particular, kind of, we heard in the Sampson clip, and you kind of heard it a little bit about Arsenal there. In the podcast, we're not going to show the clip, but Jamon Mark also mentioned about how really it was just an opportunity to, again, when you're facing off against opponent, you kind of get jumpy's not the right word, but you get that game feel. So you're facing off against another opponent. Obviously, every time you're playing against someone else, you want to do the best you possibly can. It gets the nerves up. It starts getting, like Kelvin Sampson mentioned it gets players fatigued much faster, but it's really a good process. And that's really the word about this entire scrimmage process right now. It is a process, and it's kind of trying to figure out what the strengths and weaknesses are. Now, I think the interesting thing about that right there in that clip with Arsenal is how he felt well prepared about going into the scrimmage, and really he felt that the game had slowed down for him just based off the practices that he had experienced, which from an outside perspective, that's exactly what you want to hear. From a coach's perspective, that's exactly what you want to hear from one of your younger players, that, you know, once they are on the floor, even though it's not an official game, essentially the point of practice is to not get caught like a deer in the headlights once you're there. And it's a testament to Da'Yon, like you've said on the record in the past, about just how strong of a coach that Kelvin Sampson is. You call him the best coach in the country.
For sure. And one thing, like you just mentioned, that Terrence talked about was how practice prepared him for that moment, and how he felt the game or the scrimmage that we're referring to was easier than the practice. And so that's huge kudos to the coaching staff and the work ethic and the demanding that they put into their players as far as practicing hard, but also about the process of it. One thing that a scrimmage does is it also allows coaches to help define the roles of their players, because you can do that in scrimmages, within the team scrimmages as well, and see that when you actually put players up against another player who don't know their tendencies and know the plays and the things like that, you might get a different response from players, how they react in that moment or how they perform. And so I think it works both ways. Players can get a sense of, okay, this is how I can impact winning on this team this year. This may be my role. And also coaches can go to film and go like, hey, you see, well, this is what you will be seeing a lot of this, and this may be able to define your role. And so I think it's just part of the process, like you mentioned, Andy. You're right on about that. It covers so much that's needed, questions that Coach Sampson and the staff may have, and it gives them another opportunity. Probably not their first opportunity, because I'm sure they watch their scrimmages against each other, but their first opportunity to watch film against another opponent. I'm sure that it was recorded. And so, I mean, it's just part of the process, and you got to trust the process, in which it sounds like Terrence is doing that with Coach Sampson. And so, and it sounds like he's fully bought in 100%.
No, and I think the most important part on that clip, and it's something that, Terrence mentioned it, but Jamon Mark again kind of referred to it, but going back to that entire process, it's something where Jamon Mark said, you know, he was at that point where, you know, he was in the shoes of the freshman, where, you know, a lot of it is kind of getting a real experience of it for the first time and being able to control. Maybe it's not the right way to phrase it, but kind of control those emotions and being able to grow from it now that you have that experience under the belt. Now, obviously, again, going back to the not so secret part of the scrimmages, Houston is scheduled to have another another scrimmage this upcoming Saturday against Duke. And again, it's going to be kind of like the final dress rehearsal before they do it for real on November 7th. But it was kind of one of the interesting things where they can kind of take away what was put, like you said, Da'Yon, on film and what areas they could improve on, and then kind of base it off it like you would in a real game. So it's going to be, again, like you said, part of that process and being able to move on to the next step as they move closer to the regular season, and eventually once the regular season does start, as they progress throughout the entire season, one of the final thing, kind of like the notes of Kelvin's availability this past Tuesday. I think there was a couple of interesting things. First, we've seen it throughout training camp, but it was the first time this past or yesterday when Kelvin Sampson acknowledged that Jarvis Walker has been running with the ones on the team, which again that doesn't come too much of a surprise, but it was the first time he officially acknowledged that to reporters. So that's certainly something that's a step in the right direction in terms of the progress that they've seen from Jarvis Walker and the confidence that they have in him to being able to be among the team's best. And then in regards to some of the other players, Jawan Roberts is something that Kelvin Sampson, he calls him the team's best rebounder, which I'm not too surprising what we've seen him the past few years, in particular what he was able to do at times last season. But really the main takeaway that I had from Sampson's availability this yesterday was that they hang their hat, kind of what they really pride themselves in is that development. And it's something that when he was talking specifically about Jawan Roberts, just in terms of he's always been a good rebounder, he's always been a good contributor for Houston, and now that he's kind of the way Kelvin described it, he didn't like the phrase in terms of he's coming into a new role where he's expected to see more minutes, but he's at a point where he's been developed. So now he's going to continue to do the things that he's always done, in particular, when it comes to rebound, be kind of that finisher around the rim. But now he's at a point where he's at a higher level. And when it comes to those skill sets, which again goes back to all the numerous players that he'll list off, whether it's Galen Robinson, Quentin Grimes when he first got here, Fabian White, the list is long, and we can go on and on just in terms of how the players come here and they grow throughout their time at Houston.
Yep, and one thing that Jawan mentioned in his next developing was having a consistent jump shot, whether it's mid-range or stretching out to the three-point line. I think that's the next step in his game to develop into that, because we know he's a powerful rebounder. One thing that Coach Sampson said that stood out to me, and he's been hinting at that stood out to me, was Jawan playing a five. I know him and Kellen mentioned Jawan and Jarris playing together, but Coach Sam really he mentioned that Jawan's been practicing with the fives. All up until his time this year, he's been practicing with the fours, and Coach Sampson, with Coach Sampson works with the fours, and so that tells me a lot that Jarris, of course, how you just reiterated, he's going to be starting at the four, but that J1 is going to be playing some minutes at the five. I don't know how many, but I think he's going to see a bulk of minutes at the five, and there are going to be games where he finished the game at the five, just depending on the matchup. And so I think that's something to keep an eye on, because he's one of those. He seems to have Coach Sampson's trust wholeheartedly, in which I think he's earned it with this play. I think he just needs to continue to develop, just like the rest of the team. And they are a program that develops players. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. I don't need to reel off the names. You just mentioned some of them, but that's what they do. And I expect J1 to take another step, as well as Reggie. He's been here for a while as well. I think that's an unforgotten name who started on the Final Four team. I think now that he's past his injuries, I expect him to develop and show his offensive repertoire even more as well. We know that he can rebound and play defense. So I think that center spot is going to be something to watch, because I expect JVA to get some minutes. He said he played really well in the scrimmage as well. And so I think that's something to really, really keep an eye on, is that center spot.
We have a question from our comment section. This is Jay McElveen. Who do you guys think there will be an issue with not enough minutes for all the guards? That's a good question, Da'Yon. I'll let you take it first.
Hey, what's up, Jay? He was actually our sponsor.
Yes, sir.
I mean, it's I don't think so. Yep, for 5-star properties. I don't think so. I think kind of going back into the development and the culture that he's built. I think each player trusts Coach Sampson so much that they know that their time is coming. And so whatever that he's preaching to them, I think they're 100% bought in, because when their number is called, and it will be called at some point, I think that they trust. So I think early on, Coach Sampson just kind of lets the story of the game tell itself. There'll be some games where some of the guards off the bench play more minutes potentially than some of the starters, and vice versa. So I don't think overall there will be a lack of minutes. I think he will rotate the guards, will get them a lot of experience early, and about time December, January rolls around, he'll be fully set in his rotation. And unless injuries happen at any time, then he'll have to change it. But I don't see it being a problem with the guards in the minutes. I think they'll all get minutes. But I think they really just have full trust in Coach Sampson and what he's building and what he has built. Because you just look, when your time is going to come. Marcus isn't going to be here forever. Tremont isn't going to be here forever. And those next guards coming up is Terrence, Ramon, Emmanuel. And so I think they're learning so much from Marcus and what you hear from them say that, and Tremont and Jamal. And so I think I know, of course, they want to play, but I don't think they're really worried about minutes. I think they just worried about being ready when their number is called, letting Coach Sampson down, not getting his bad side, seeing his bad side, and really just being ready.
Yeah, and Da'Yon, I think to add on to your point, I 100% agree. But I mean, it goes back to recruiting and something that Kelvin Sampson preaches and reiterates numerous times. He's told us as a part of the media, just in terms of they recruit kids that, whether it comes the whole process, they recruit kids that want to be in Houston, that they believe in, and just overall are a perfect fit for what Kelvin Sampson and his staff are looking for. So I'm sure, and it's something that Kelvin said throughout the past, he never promises any players when they come here that they're going to have, play a set amount of minutes and they're going to have a specific role, which again, it just goes back to the word for the program that's buying into the culture. And the culture goes back to not being as much of a me mindset and much more of what's going to be the benefit for the team. So I agree 100% with you, Da'Yon. And I'm toss it over to another question. This was asked by John Lopez on YouTube. Who is the X factor for this team? Which another good question. And I'm thinking there's a whole bunch of different players that could be candidates to be X factors. I think we should split. Yeah, I think for the preseason or in the preseason heading into the regular season, I think we might be able to, or at least I'll split it into the forwards and guards, or the bigs and the guards. And when it comes to the guards, I think that X factor is going to be, honestly, Terrence Arsenal, because we know what we're going to get from Jamal Shed. We know what we're going to get from Marcus Sasser. We know what we're going to get from Tremont Mark. I believe Jamal Shed, Marcus Sasser, and Tremont Mark. We know what we're going to get from those three guys. And then after that, it's kind of who's gonna step up and kind of be that fourth guard. And obviously Ramon Walker has experience. He showed some big plays last season. It's going to be kind of crucial to see what his development has been like from last season. So he could be another candidate. But I think Terrence Arsenal in particular, it's a player to watch. And we heard that clip, and something that wasn't in this clip specifically, but he said during his availability, which, by the way, shameless plug, if you do want to watch the full video, be sure to check out the channel and subscribe. That's why you follow us here on Pawd Slama Jama for the full clip. But one thing that Arsenal said is that he had a conversation with Kelvin Sampson, and they talked about his role heading into it, which just hearing Arsenal talk, it looks like his relationship with Kelvin Sampson is really good. And just overall, he said, he's pushing him hard. You heard it from that clip right there. He felt the practices were much tougher than the scrimmage was. So I think he could very easily be an X factor for the guard position. I think in the front court, or when it comes to the bigs in particular, I think it's going to be Reggie Chaney, and the reason for that, it'll be what he can bring, essentially from a standpoint of that. We know that he's going to be that veteran presence. We know that he can rebound, but one, like you mentioned, what's his health status look like, and two, what kind of is the role that Houston envisions? Because, like you said, there's going to be a lot of opportunities to kind of move around Reggie along with Juwan Roberts and Jarris Walker.
I'm gonna start with the front court, if that's where you left off. I'm gonna say with Jarris, because you mentioned the scoring from the guards, and you talk about some of those post players, and I think Jarris is the best scorer out of those group. And you look at the production that they got last year from their post, and over throughout the history, they've gotten production from their post. And who's going to bring that this year? Who's going to be that player to do that? And I expect Jarris to do that. I expect them to feature him in the mid post area, allow him to go one-on-one, whether it's face up or backing his player down, whatever he chooses to do. So I think his offensive production is going to be key on a game in, game out. Like you just said, we know the guards are going to produce, And I think he's just going to need to be consistent. And that's, I know he's a freshman. I know it's a lot to ask, and Coach Sampson always kind of tempers down expectations for freshmen and know they have a learning curve to do so. But I think his athleticism and his size to be able to run the floor, just do different things. I think he's going to be an X factor in the front court. Throughout the guards, I've been going back and forth while you were saying, Andy. I would have to say, I'm battling between Jamal Shead and Tremont Mark. Those are the two I'm thinking about. I'm gonna go with Tremont. I think he's the X factor for the guards, because Marcus is going to draw. He's going to be at the top of the scouting report for every team on every game. He's going to give you on a game in, game out. And with Jamal, he's going to be steady with his playmaking, his defense, running the show. I think Tremont has a huge role not only to produce offensively, but to also do playmaking when Jamal isn't on the floor. I think he's a really good playmaker. And another thing he does really well is get to the free throw line. But I think he's so hungry to prove to the outside world how good he is. I've been following him since high school, and I know what he can do, but it almost seems he's a forgotten piece because of the success Houston has had over the last year, and he hasn't been in the forefront of that. And so I think he has a huge chip on his shoulder, and he's going to have a huge impact on the team, and I think he will do that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great choice, especially from what we've seen already during the red and white scrimmage, what we've heard about what happened this past weekend in Texas. It certainly seems like Tremont Mark, or what happened in San Antonio against Texas, it certainly seems like Tremont Mark is much more comfortable heading into the season. And again, now that he has that shoulder injury behind him, I absolutely agree, because you can't go wrong, and it's a perfect choice just in terms of what he brings to the table. And again, going back to Jamal Shead, we know what he brings from a facilitator standpoint, from a playmaking standpoint, and then obviously, of course, we know that Marcus Sasser is kind of the rock, that he can do it all. He can shot create for himself, he can create for others. And most important, like you said, he's going to draw in all the attention from the opposing defenses. He's going to be the top priority for opposing defense against Houston. Is there anything else you wanted to add before I go to the next question?
Yeah, I wanted to add one thing. Why I was debating between Jamal and Tremont is because we've been hearing Jamal's been working on his jump shot. I think that's going to be key, because teams are going to want to keep Tremont out of the paint, and also Marcus and Jarris, everyone out of the paint. And so I think he's going to have a lot of open looks, specifically at three, in which he's going to have to be able to knock that down consistently, in which I think he can do that. And so just wanted to add, that's why I was who should I decide between Tremont and Jamal? But I think Jamal is going to do everything else exceptionally well. He isn't going to have to shoot a high percentage from three to still be one of the best point guards in the nation.
No, but that's a great point. If we get to a point where Jamal Shead is knocking down that 3-point shot consistently, I mean, I don't know how opposing teams can guard Houston, especially when you have their starting five on the court. But that's a kind of a perfect segue for this other question by John Lopez. What will be this year's team's weakness? Which again, that's really difficult. But
let me get this one. I think I would say, when you play against teams like a North Carolina who have Bangkok, or like a Kentucky who has Oscar, I can't remember his name. I don't remember how I want to pronounce his first name is Oscar. He's on a preseason All-American team. Or teams like Gonzaga who have Drew Timme. I think without having the size that we have last year with a Josh Carlton, those teams who have 6'10", 6'11", 6'7" foot centers may be an Achilles heel. I know we play that monster defense where we trap the post and force them to give it up. So maybe that won't be a weakness. I don't know. Let me think about that. That's a good question. What about you, Andy?
no, it is. I think, and I don't know if you can outright call it a weakness. I think you'll see the biggest question heading into the season is how quickly do the freshmen, especially in particular, Jarris Walker, Terrence Arsenault, and Emmanuel Sharp, how quickly are they comfortable being a part of the Houston rotation. How quickly can they pick up the defensive thing? I think that's going to be the biggest question mark, especially when we're focusing in on Jarvis Walker, because if he gets to a point where he picks up the defensive side of things and how Houston wants to run things, the quicker that he does it, the much better Houston overall as a team is going to be. I think if that's one area where opposing teams could exploit, it's something that Kelvin Sampson has said. And again, it doesn't have anything to do with skill. It's much more, they're freshmen. This is a process that they have to learn. But honestly, if I had to pick, I'd go with that. And that's being really nitpicky. And I guess maybe you could go when it comes to again, that center position. What's that going to look like? Is it going to be Reggie Chaney? Is it going to be Juwan Roberts? I mean, could it be JVA Francis? I think that's the one position that you could consider a weakness. But again, it's tough.
It's tough. Now thinking about it, I'm gonna have to say 3-point shooting. Just looking at it right now, coming into the season, you got one knockdown shooter who's a sniper, and that's Marcus Sasser. The rest of the players can shoot, but I don't know if you would put them in a category as a shooter. And we saw last year the Achilles heel from the team at times were shooting, specifically 3-point shooting. And so I think that can be a weakness, but when you got the likes of Marcus Sasser, it's hard to say that can be a weakness. But I think consistency on a game-to-game basis, teams may want to allow Houston to shoot from the outside of Marcus.
No, that's a great point. And I mean, something to that Kelvin Sampson said. He says they hang their hat on defense, rebounding, and taking care of the ball. He says that gives them the best chance to win. So again, going back to your point, there's going to be times where their shots aren't falling. But the thing about Houston is that they don't really they emphasize on the other side when it comes to exactly. So even if I mean, choose just again in that clip he mentioned the Villanova Elite Eight game loss where Houston was abysmal from shooting on the floor, particular 3-point shooting, and they had an opportunity to win that game. And that just goes to show how tough that Houston team is. We're seeing a lot of comments, a lot of other people chime in. I think King Jaja makes up a great point where he says size will be an issue. Again, going back to that center position when it comes to Reggie Chaney and who kind of will be that when it comes to Reggie Chaney, J1, and JVA Francis. I think this is interesting. Avoid potential bad losses to St. Mary's and at Oregon's. Playing old veteran teams early in the year will be a good test. Avoiding scoring drops is also important. So he kind of hit on some of the points we've talked on, but I think that's an interesting point. Again, playing old veteran teams will be a good test because again, Houston's going to be relying, in particular, when it comes to maybe not relying on the freshmen, but the freshmen are going to be playing some important roles down the stretch. Maybe not so much early, but the quicker that they pick it up, or the quicker they get comfortable in the Houston system, could be a testament to how dominant Houston becomes.
Yeah, I think, but also I think we gotta have to remember you got a Ramon Walker who earned valuable minutes coming off the bench, and maybe he can. Well, I don't. I just want to see the rotation. It's hard to see what I say without really seeing the rotation, and so I think they're embedded to the culture already. It's just about getting. It's just about transitioning to the college game. I think that's the transition and the speed. Yeah, the game, the speed, everything that goes around in the game. I think that's something we'll have to take in account. But like Jaja said, I think size could potentially be a factor. But I think JVA, he has good size, and I don't know his wingspan, but it may be 7'4", 7'5". Coach Sampson called him one of the best shot blockers. So I expect him to play a huge role. But I agree with you, Jaja. I think that was almost one of my weaknesses, and I think it can be probably at times, but with the way they play their post defense and they trap everything in the post, it's hard to beat Houston with a dominant post player. It's really hard.
Yeah, and Norbert chimed in as well. He said this team's weakness will be the time it takes to mesh together as a cohesive team and the inexperience from some of the freshmen. Followed it up by saying there will be an adjustment period and yes, consistent 3-point shooting. Good point, Da'Yon. So, I mean, they're all valid concerns, and I think it's interesting. But Da'Yon, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. I feel like those concerns are much more. Maybe nitpicky is not an exact word, but they're valid concerns. But I feel like I'm comfortable that they won't be as big of a problem. Is it? It could just be that, again, going back to what Kelvin Sampson, the coaching staff have done. Like you said, the proof is in the pudding. I feel like they'll be able to figure it out relatively quick. What say you?
I think so too. I think so too, because it isn't. I don't see a game where you'll have all three freshmen on the floor at one time or
Oh
two
no,
freshmen.
yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
right.
So let's keep in mind they'll be on the floor with a veteran guard who has experience, and they won't be asked to do much. And so there is a transition period for sure. But that's a great point. I think the time it takes to really gel together as a team. But that's why you have the greatest, best coach in the country, because that's where coaching comes in. And so I full trust in the coaching staff. And you got the talent, you got the players, you got everything you need. And it's just about putting it together.
Absolutely. Last question here before we wrap things up from John Lopez. Which game are you most looking forward to this upcoming season? And I'm gonna start, and you've got to circle December 10th against Alabama at Fertitta Center, a rematch of what happened last season. They played in Tuscaloosa against Alabama, came down to the final possession. We had the controversy at the end of the game. Was it a goaltend? Was it not a goaltend? I think that's, especially when it comes to non-conference, that's the game that you got to have circled, and it's going to be a home game. I know there's been some fans that have complained about the lack of marquee matchups for Houston at Fertitta Center. That's going to be one of those marquee matchups, and it's going to be, I think that's going to be the game that you have to have circled. What say you?
I don't disagree with you at all. I think that's a good game for sure at that circle. But I'm gonna go with in the non-conference Oregon. I'm gonna go with non-conference
Yeah,
Oregon.
that'll
Last
be a
time
tough
that we
test.
played Oregon on the road, we lost against that game. I don't know why the guard name who plays for the Celtics now. His name just skipped my mind. Really good guard. But anyway, I think that's a good test. They had a good recruiting class. They had a down year last year, but their team with a ton of talent. But I mean, it's Memphis, of course. I mean, of course, Alabama, non-conference, but it's Memphis. I mean, that's the biggest game in my opinion that I can't wait to see. Memphis. I got that one circled.
And you were referring to Peyton Pritchard, correct? The last time
Yeah, Peyton
they
Pritchard.
played
Peyton.
at Oregon, and I mean, yeah, that was a tough battle. It was a game that really Oregon was in control for much of it, and Houston was kind of just hanging around. They could never kind of get over that hump. I think another game that you can throw in there that really a lot of people aren't really talking about, just because of how dominant Houston was against them this last season when they played at Fertitta Center, but this time they have to travel on the road and play at Virginia, which, I mean, that's not going to be an easy task either.
Is it? And they're transitioning from a new coach who their coach retired, but they have a coach who's been in the system. And I agree with you, Andy. It's not going to be an easy test either. Virginia is a good program, just like Houston, a recent national championship winner. And so that's definitely not going to be an easy game.
Absolutely. And I know I said John Lopez was the final question. King George's will be the real one. And I'm just curious to get your thoughts on this. Looking ahead, do you think the current size of the Fertitta Center will be an issue transitioning to the Big 12?
I don't think so. I often thought about the size of it even before going into the Big 12, but it kind of plays into Houston favor because of you can pack it out. It's not as big, and the noise can be really impact the game. And so I don't think so. One thing I will say, I think they need to expand the student section. I don't think it's close enough to the floor. You see some of the other student sections. I mean, I like it, but I don't like it. That's just nitpicking. I think it could be closer to the floor of the students. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it could be bigger. It won't hurt, but I don't think it'd be an issue. I think one thing it will be an issue is when they travel in the Big 12 and go see some of those crowds, because you playing in the American, the crowds you see in the American are not going to be equivalent to the crowds that you're going to see when you get in the Big 12.
Yeah, and I mean they've showed it in some of the past when they have had to play in tough crowds. At Wichita State, at Cincinnati, you can throw in at Memphis in there. But I mean, even going back to last season when they had to play at Alabama, I think the way they've been able to respond in those environments, I think that's pretty it's key, and it's certainly a valid concern. But I think it's interesting to see how they've been able to play in those matchups. And then going back to your point about the student section, I know you said it was nitpicky, but I think they're kind of I wouldn't say stuck, but when it comes to in particular the student section that's already on the floor, there's not really much more they can do to expand unless if they make more bleachers or I don't know. It's interesting to think about. I
Or
think the
maybe
one
one thing they maybe could do is put an additional student section behind one of the basketball goals. You
Yeah,
have
they
the one on the
could.
floor, then you could potentially have like an area for like behind the basketball goals. Because you watch college basketball, you see student sections behind the goal doing all kind of crazy stuff.
Right. Right. No, I mean, no, that's a valid point. I hadn't thought of that. And I think the biggest thing about Fertitta Center is if they could switch the cameras around where you could actually see the student section. But again, that's being nitpicky when it comes to the TV aspect. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Pawd Slama Jama. Once again, if you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel below that you are watching us. Once again, your one-stop shop for all things Houston Cougars football, men's basketball, and women's basketball. We actually picked up a subscriber during the show, so we are 2 away from 400. Obviously, of course, the biggest goal. We're on the road to 1,000. Once again, that's going to really help us out once we hit that 1,000 because that's when we can start monetizing off the channel. And at the end of the day, it will help us continuing to produce the Houston Cougars content that you guys love so much. But as always, Da'Yon, I'm going to toss it over to you for the final word. But first, be sure to also follow us on social media. It's Let's Rage Cougs on Instagram and TikTok, like you see it on the ticker. All lowercase, no caps, no special symbols. It's just Let's Rage Cougs on both Instagram and TikTok. And obviously, of course, on Twitter at Pawd Slama Jama. That's at PAWDSLAMAJAMA. Da'Yon, final word. What are we going to end on today?
Well, just like Andy said, make sure you follow all social media accounts, like us, subscribe to our YouTube page. But I want to give thanks to all the interaction, man. Great questions. We appreciate it. We appreciate all the support. But please, man, take 5 seconds out your day just to like and subscribe to our YouTube page. But we can't end the episode without Go Cougs, baby.